Even can. There we go. Welcome to our group meeting for container security. Alexander, you've got a demo item for us.
Yeah, I wanted to share that the work for adding the security tab to the agent managed clusters has begun. The tab is now created and there's nothing in it yet. Daniel's still wrapping up a few MRs for the operational vulnerabilities work, which will is needed for this, but the tab is there. I think I turned on the feature behind the feature flag for CNP, everyone's favorite staging protect project. If you want to go check it out there, it's pretty cool. I'm really excited.
Awesome, great work on that. So yeah, for today, we've got a couple items for planning breakdown. This first one, we're not quite sure if we're going to fund it yet, but we would like to put it through planning breakdown and refinement just to get an idea of the size of it. You may be aware that right now we don't have any engineers formally allocated to container network security. The category's been put in sort of a community contribution mode where it's still around, and we've expressed that we intend to invest in it in the future, but we don't have any immediate plans for that. So where the certificate method has been deprecated, that means that that impacts some features that we have currently. So we went ahead and created this epic to outline the work that would be needed to address the policy editor UI piece of container network security and adding agent support for that. I'll just step through these requirements real briefly for the sake of anyone who may be watching, and as a good recap for anyone here. So again, right now, if you come into security and compliance and you go to the policies page and you work on your network policies, right now it reads and writes directly to the Kubernetes cluster. And it does that with the service token that's used to set up the certificate based connection for Kubernetes clusters. So we don't have any way of doing this through the agent. The idea is that instead, we'll be able to create and save network policies. We'll generate an MR back into that linked security policy project. So we'll be storing these network policies as YAML inside of the security policy project. And then those policies will show up just like all the other policies do in that policy list. It'll no longer pull the list of policies directly from Kubernetes. So what you see in that policy list will now be what's in your security policy project YAML file, which may or may not be in sync with Kubernetes. And we would probably want to add this under further details. One of the downsides of going this route is you don't necessarily know if your policies are in sync with what is in Kubernetes. So a good follow-on improvement to this would be to make that obvious in the UI. But for now, that's out of scope for this particular epic. We would just simply show the list of policies in that security policy project. So, you know, we might add in the future like a last synced date or a last updated date, just to know that those are actually being pushed into the Kubernetes cluster. We'd be adding a new setting to the config for the Kubernetes agent to turn network policy management on or off. If it was off, we would do nothing. If it's on, then what we actually would go do is we would overwrite any existing network policies and push our policies in. So if somebody had created a network policy in there that was not found in our security policy project, we would delete that policy. If we had a policy that did not exist in the Kubernetes cluster, then we would create it. If we had a different version of the same named policy, then we would overwrite it and replace it with ours. And the reason for that is security users want to actually enforce this. A big part of the value proposition is that, you know, by storing all of this in Git, you now have a commit history, you have MR approvals. So really no one should be creating network policies directly in Kubernetes. And if they did, we would want to overwrite that and replace it with our configuration. So a lot of back-end changes, at least a few front-end changes here to adjust the workflow so that it generates an MR instead of reading and writing directly to Kubernetes. Are there any questions about this that we want to discuss before we move to refinement?
So I linked a similar issue in the comments for cluster image scanning. And I've been talking with Mikhail on that issue about the implementation plan. He did make a few suggestions. We might be able to implement this without changing Rails at all. Because the Kubernetes agent server has, I'm not totally sure how it works under the hood, but it has like a client library that can talk with GitLab, and it's able to download files directly from GitLab. So that's how it retrieves the agent configuration. And we might be able to do the same thing for the security policies.
That's great because it saves us from having to create a new CAS endpoint.
Yes.
Nice, Brian.
It would be really nice if we already have that path, that workflow set up. And I'm assuming most of the work then would just be on the agent side.
Yeah, we would just need to change the agent so that it can apply the network policies pretty much.
Yeah, the logic that Sam was describing to basically do a diff of what's what and synchronize to what to the single source of truth. And given that we don't have rules mode for this, so
we have rules mode actually.
We do? Oh.
So one thing I just thought of is
of course we do. Yeah. Sorry.
So we could basically use GitOps and let people put the security policies YAML files inside a GitOps project, and then just have GitOps create the network security policies.
So I think that's more or less what's being defined, the work that's been outlined in this related issue, which is to support auto DevOps or GitOps with the GitLab Kubernetes agent. This is really more on the configure side to make that happen. And we want both. So this would be the experience for free users, but for ultimate tier users, we want to provide that additional UI and that additional management where we're separating out the security responsibilities from everyone else. So anyway, that's part of why we separated this out in the first place. We created this separate policy management experience to provide just make it more usable and separate out that management for those ultimate tier users.
Right.
So now I'm thinking here on that comment about Bruce mode, if there's a little bit more front end than I expected, because maybe the format of the YAML will change, because now it's going to be, it won't be wrapped. Well, actually, because it's pushed through kubectl, it should be the same format, right, Brian?
Sorry.
I was saying that
I'm actually not sure about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, something for us that we can probably discover during refinement. Alexander, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I foresee right now sort of changing all the endpoints that we use and then having to update the front end for the new data that we get, massage it into the right ways and whatever.
Now we would want to modify the actual YAML schema itself a little bit, because right now you're writing just a raw network policy. And I'm assuming we would want to adjust that a little bit to think of it more in terms of like rules and actions like we've got for everything else. So I'm assuming the actual network policy YAML itself would be part of the rule. And then, you know, we still would need like the type to be the name. So anyway, we might, I don't know if we need to make changes there, but it seems to me intuitively that we might need to adjust, just make some very slight changes to the format of the YAML.
Yeah, and as Sam, as you've seen, there's that to and from YAML method that dictates whether it's parsable or not, and so that's going to have to be probably changed as well.
A little bit, yeah, probably some small changes on the front end.
That was back from Arthur, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, and they're quite complicated, so
yes,
it may be nice to nuke them entirely and start from scratch.
Yeah. At the time, there was a whole argument because he figured out a way to make it simpler, but then he was against the GitLab policy. He basically was using first class functions, and it was going to be unexpected by a bunch of people. But yeah, he made it a lot more complicated.
I do remember that MR.
Remember that? Yeah.
And it was.
Savash will remember. Yeah, it was a good one.
Anyway, so hopefully that any other questions I can address for what we're planning for the scope of this epic anyway.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. I will move that to refinement. We'll put a sizing on that. Like I said, I do not yet know if we are going to do that work or not do that work. I'm discussing that with my product leadership right now to figure out where that falls in terms of priority, because obviously if we do this, something else is going to be delayed. But we'll work that out. For now, we'll just move that to refinement and get a good sizing on it before we start work.
Yeah, and Sam, congratulations. It looks like you kicked off quite the thread on this deprecation issue, talking about all this. I'm trying to like catch up on it, and it's thread for miles.
Yeah, there's a lot there. The summary is that even though the certificate method of connecting is being deprecated, we are not, at least not yet, maybe not ever, but right now we're not deprecating the container network security and host security features. So we do rely on a dependency, upstream dependency of us, which is a configure team feature that's been deprecated. But just like if GitLab, the product, were to use an upstream dependency that became deprecated, it doesn't automatically make GitLab, the product, deprecated. We're kind of still in that same situation where we're using a deprecated upstream dependency, but our features are not deprecated at this point in time. So we're working through and figuring out what our plans are to move off of those deprecated items.
Nice.
And that's the short summary. So yeah, one more item here for planning breakdown. Thanks for adding this, Alexander. In fact, we should probably review everything in that parent epic as well, to see if there's anything else that needs to be covered for planning breakdown. I think earlier we sort of started a planning breakdown on some of these, but I know we've added scope and moved things around. So it's great to review this again, because there's a lot in that parent epic.
So the epic linked is the cards one, using the cards for selection.
Yep. Yeah, so this modifies the workflow to create a two-step process when you're creating a new policy. This will not apply for editing a policy. Editing a policy will follow the same workflow as today. But when creating a new policy, you'll come to a page with these new cards. And of course, we don't have scan result policies quite yet. So for the first iteration, it'll just be these two. But you'll have these cards to pick from. You pick your policy, and then you're taken to step 2, which is the page that we're familiar with here. So we'll have this new like breadcrumb thing up top, and a new back to step 1 button at the bottom.
And the hitting the browser's back button should also take you to the step one as well, right?
I would expect that behavior. We could clarify, that might be a question to clarify with Camellia. I don't have a hard product requirement there because it also is kind of like a wizard, but we're not really presenting it in a modal box. So it does kind of imply that you're going to a new page. So it could kind of go either way, you know, because I see modals where you're not being taken to a new page. So going back would just take you back. But yeah, I could see it go either way. That might be a good question for Camellia. Based on the way that it is, though, not in a modal, I would expect it to take you back if you hit the browser's back button.
And should there be, should the URLs be able to be saved? Like if someone's making many scan execution policies or wants to share that with someone else who wants to make a scan execution policy, should the URLs be different between step one and step two?
Great question, Alexander.
Yeah,
Somebody...
another great question. I don't know if that's thought through in the design. I don't know that that's a hard requirement either. I don't think we have that defined one way or another. So that's probably a design question. Another one I'm going to probably pass over to Camellia.
As a user, I'd love if I had a direct link to create.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, if you can do it easily, then do it, right? Like, how much is that a hard requirement? I don't know, but that would be ideal for sure.
I think that the URL difference between the breadcrumbs might be a requirement for the back button going to the previous page also. I'll look into that. That might be a small backend change.
Yeah, one downside of having a dedicated URL for each of these that we would want to think through is then if I come here to step two, I guess we no longer have the ability to switch types up top. But when you edit it, you would still have that drop down at the top for changing the type.
You do, it's always the same link.
Yeah, so if you do switch types of policies, then it would just lose any work that you have here previously. Could be one downside of having a separate URL for each policy type.
You could use a fragment, and then you wouldn't have to change the backend, but the URLs could still be different.
Yeah, that's a great solution. That would get us the best of both.
I think we should let Alexandra work it out.
These are all great suggestions. I accept all suggestions always. Also, you mentioned something about editing a policy, and that made me think, is there a design for when you edit? I'm assuming when you edit a policy, the breadcrumb and the header goes away completely. Like you shouldn't be able to switch types on when you're editing an already existing policy.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wrote up the requirements saying that the edit experience won't change at all. So we'd still have that same like select drop down to switch the policy type, but that might be something to clarify as well with Camellia. So maybe this one's not quite ready for refinement. It sounds like we're getting a good list of design questions for Camellia here.
We already disabled the drop down for edited or for already existing policies anyways, so I would expect that would just disappear.
Then yeah, that's an easy solution. We'd just take that out entirely.
Or leave it in disabled as it is so people know to scan execute like what type of policy they're editing if they forget somehow.
Yeah, that would be nice. Once you're here, it's not clear what type of policy. We don't actually say that anywhere. Maybe up here, new vulnerability result. I think this should say scan result policy. So we've got this header. Yeah, if you're editing it, I'm not sure what that would say. I would expect that, well, you've got the name of the policy here. So instead of new, maybe it just says scan result policy. I'm not sure. Yeah, good design questions for Camellia. All right, so it
Cool.
sounds like that one may not be 100% ready for refinement. Alexander, you're okay to take the action item of posting those questions back to Camellia. That'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. I will rewatch this video to remember all of them.
Sounds good, thank you. Or we could just direct Camellia here too. Overall, we've got a pretty good list in this parent epic too. So I wanted to just run through these briefly. And this is great because we've got Alexander and Tiago and Brian. So we've got all of you on the phone or on the Zoom call here. It'd be great to identify which of these are back end because I think most of these are front end, but there might be a couple back end in here that got lumped in. So this is the one we just discussed. This one.
Backend.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it's backend.
This one's back end. It's got back end label on it.
Yeah, I think Dominic was having trouble refining that one, and I think he asked Alan a question or something and never heard back. So probably ought to follow up on that one.
Yeah, we'll probably need to punt it from 14.6 because it hasn't finished refinement. It's a P3, so it should be okay.
Yeah, usually we don't have bugs inside of feature epics anyway, so that one is a little bit out of place there. I'm just looking to see if any of these others need planning breakdown discussions. Parse cron scheduling syntax. You're already working on this one, I think, Alexander.
It's in review.
In review.
Yeah, sorry I didn't assign that one to myself.
Split up rule mode and YAML previewer. Okay, so yeah, this is one of those design things, splitting it up for the mocks, because we've changed the mocks a lot since we initially implemented this. Going through these, stop me if there are any like planning breakdown questions that we need to cover here, like requirements related.
Actually, any of the ones that have the FE colon in the front of the names, those are ones I've looked at and specifically broken down and identified as front end, so we can skip all of those.
Perfect. Let's see, interactive validation in the security policy editor. Does this one need a design issue, I wonder?
So I would need Alexander to confirm, but I think that all the components for this already exist. So it would probably be pretty easy to implement because the CI/CD editor already has it. And
the remaining ones are ready for development, Sam.
Okay. Perfect. And I thought there was one in here about just cleaning up the overall UX. Maybe you split that out into these ones. Yeah, it looks like you split those out into those FE issues. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're close to having this. I mean, this was a sort of a muddy epic because it's, it's got a whole bunch of different things just thrown together here as follow-on issues. So it's hard to like wrap it all around one thing, but I think we're getting close there to having the whole thing collectively ready to be refined because there are different pieces all in different stages. And this one may be the last one to go through refinement, it looks like.
Yeah, I was wondering maybe that last one, the card one, should not be in this epic, should be its own epic. I saw you promoted it already. But we can leave it there if that is better for you.
Yeah, either way, I would say whatever is best for you, honestly. So okay. Want to leave it or close it out, that's fine. Cool. I think that's everything for today. Sorry about my audio issues. Let me know if you have any more questions on either of these two big epics.
Awesome. Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye, friends.